St. Catharines, Ontario, October 17, 1987. A hotel restaurant hums with wedding guests. Laughter spills over champagne glasses. A blonde teenager in a pink dress leans against the wall, 17 and restless. Across the room, a young man watches her. Handsome, confident, 23. He walks over and says something that makes her laugh. She blushes. They exchange numbers. It looks like a fairy tale beginning. It was the start of something else entirely. Her name was Karla Homolka. His was Paul Bernardo. Within months they would call themselves soulmates. Within years, the media would call them Ken and Barbie. Beautiful, wholesome, the couple everyone wanted to be. But behind closed doors, they were architects of horror. Together they drugged, raped, tortured, and murdered teenage girls. One of them Karla's own sister. This is not a love story. This is a case study in complicity, in how evil wears a smile, in how ordinary people with ordinary faces commit acts so monstrous the mind recoils, and in how the justice system, desperate for answers, made a deal with the devil and handed her 12 years instead of life. This is the story of how Karla Homolka walked free, how she changed her name, had children, and disappeared into the suburbs, and how to this day she has never once said she was sorry. Karla Leanne Homolka was born May 4, 1970, in Port Credit, Ontario, youngest of 3 daughters. Middle-class family. Her father worked in sales. Her mother, a homemaker. By all accounts, it was normal, unremarkable. Karla was a bright student, worked part-time at a pet store, had friends, liked boys. There were no warning signs, no childhood trauma paraded later in court. Just a girl who, by 17, had learned that men liked her. That attention felt like power. Paul Kenneth Bernardo was born August 27, 1964, in Scarborough, a suburb of Toronto. His childhood was darker. His father, abusive and cold. His mother, bitter and distant. Paul later learned he was the product of an affair, a fact that shattered whatever fragile identity he'd built. But by the time he met Karla, Paul had perfected a mask. Charming, ambitious, well-dressed. He worked in accounting, drove a nice car, spoke with confidence. No one suspected that behind the smile was a man already hunting women in the dark. Because before Karla, Paul was already a serial rapist. Between 1987 and 1990, he attacked at least 14 women in Scarborough. He wore a mask, carried a knife, waited in the shadows near bus stops and parking lots. The media called him the Scarborough Rapist. Police had DNA. They had sketches. But no name. Not yet. When Karla met Paul, she saw what he wanted her to see. A handsome older man who called her beautiful, who drove her to nice restaurants, who made her feel chosen. She had no idea that weeks earlier, Paul had dragged a woman into the bushes and raped her at knife point. She had no idea that the man holding her hand had already destroyed lives. But Karla wasn't naive for long. Paul introduced her to his world gradually. First, rough sex. Then, videotaped sex. Then, fantasies he wanted her to fulfill. He told her he wanted virgins, that deflowering young girls excited him, that she should help him find them. And Karla, 17 and infatuated, said yes. This is where the story turns. Because Karla Homolka didn't just tolerate Paul Bernardo's darkness. She participated. She planned. She drugged the victims. She held them down. She watched. And later, when investigators found the videotapes, they would see her smiling. The first victim was Karla's own sister, Tammy Lynn Homolka, 15 years old, blonde, innocent. Paul wanted her, and Karla gave her to him. On December 23, 1990, Karla stole animal tranquilizers from the veterinary clinic where she worked. That night, while the Homolka family watched television downstairs, Karla and Paul mixed the drugs into Tammy's drink. She passed out on the couch. They carried her to the basement. Karla held a cloth soaked in halothane, an anesthetic, over her sister's face. Paul raped her while Karla videotaped. They took turns assaulting her. But something went wrong. Tammy began to choke on her own vomit. Her lips turned blue. Karla and Paul panicked. They called 911, but Tammy was already dying. She was pronounced dead at the hospital. The official cause of death: accidental choking. The Homolka family believed it. The police believed it. Karla cried at the funeral. Paul comforted her. No one suspected that the grieving sister had drugged and delivered her own sibling to a rapist. But Tammy's death didn't stop them. If anything, it emboldened them, because they'd gotten away with it. Karla and Paul married in June 1991. The ceremony was lavish. Karla wore a white gown. Paul looked like a model. The photos show them smiling, radiant, the perfect couple. But the honeymoon footage told a different story. Paul recorded everything, every degradation, every act. He kept the tapes in a hidden compartment, a catalogue of his dominance. And Karla was always there, complicit, participating, sometimes initiating. She wasn't just a victim of abuse. She was an accomplice. 3 months after the wedding, they struck again. Jane Doe, a 15-year-old girl drugged, raped, and assaulted over an entire weekend. Karla lured her. Paul filmed it. The girl survived, but had no memory of what happened. Karla smiled and said she'd had too much to drink. But it was the next 2 victims, Leslie Mahaffy and Kristen, whose deaths would finally bring Paul and Karla's reign of terror to an end. June 15, 1991. Leslie Mahaffy, 14 years old, was locked out of her house after missing curfew. She sat on the curb outside her home, waiting. Around midnight, Paul Bernardo drove by. He saw her, alone, vulnerable. He stopped the car. He pulled out a knife. He forced her inside. Karla was waiting at home. When Paul arrived with Leslie, Karla didn't protest. She didn't call the police. She helped. For 2 days, they kept Leslie captive in their house on 57 Bayview Drive. They drugged her. They raped her repeatedly. They filmed everything. Leslie cried. She begged. She asked if she would see her family again. Karla told her, maybe. On June 16th, Paul strangled Leslie with an electrical cord. They dismembered her body with a circular saw in the basement. They encased her remains in blocks of cement and dumped them in Lake Gibson. 2 weeks later, on June 29th, Karla and Paul got married as planned. While the concrete blocks containing Leslie's body settled at the bottom of the lake, Karla and Paul danced at their wedding reception. Leslie's remains were discovered by a man canoeing on the lake. The cement had cracked. Her body surfaced. The investigation began. But Paul and Karla were still untouchable. The police had no leads, no suspects, and the videotapes remained hidden. April 16, 1992. Kristen, 15 years old, was walking home from school in St. Catharines. It was 3 p.m., broad daylight. Witnesses saw a cream-colored Camaro pull up beside her. A blonde woman got out and asked for directions. Kristen approached. Paul grabbed her from behind and forced her into the car. Karla drove. They took Kristen to their house. For 3 days, they tortured her. They raped her. They filmed her pleading for her life. Paul forced her to pretend she was enjoying it, and Karla watched, emotionless. On April 19th, Paul strangled Kristen with a ligature. They dumped her body in a ditch 50 kilometers away. Her remains were found on April 30th. Her hair had been cut. Her body was naked and discarded like trash. The public was horrified. 2 teenage girls, abducted, tortured, murdered. The police launched the largest investigation in Ontario's history. Task forces formed. Sketches circulated. DNA testing began. But it wasn't the investigation that broke the case. It was Karla herself. By early 1993, Paul's violence had turned inward. He began beating Karla. Black eyes, broken ribs, bruises she couldn't hide. On January 5, 1993, after a particularly brutal assault, Karla left Paul and moved in with relatives. She went to the hospital. She filed a report. And when police saw the extent of her injuries, they started asking questions. Karla told them Paul was abusive, that she was terrified, that she wanted a divorce. But she didn't mention the murders. Not yet. Meanwhile, forensic investigators finally matched Paul Bernardo's DNA to the Scarborough rapes. On February 17, 1993, Paul was arrested. Police searched the house on Bayview Drive. They found hair samples, blood traces, but they didn't find the videotapes. Paul had hidden them too well, inside a light fixture in the bathroom. Karla knew where they were, but she didn't tell the police. Not immediately. Instead, Karla hired a lawyer, a very good lawyer, George Walker, and together they made a deal. In exchange for her testimony against Paul, Karla would plead guilty to manslaughter, not murder. She would receive 12 years, not life. The Crown accepted. They needed her testimony to convict Paul. Without her, they had circumstantial evidence, but no eyewitness, no confession, no video proof. Karla signed the deal on May 14, 1993. 4 months later, Paul's lawyer found the videotapes hidden in the house. When the Crown prosecutors watched them, they were horrified. The tapes showed Karla wasn't a battered wife. She was a willing participant. She was drugging girls. She was assaulting them. She was smiling. But the deal was done. Legally binding. Karla Homolka would serve 12 years, and there was nothing the Crown could do about it. The public was outraged. The media called it the deal with the devil. But Karla walked into prison with a sentence most murderers never get. Paul Bernardo's trial began in 1995. The courtroom was packed. The evidence was overwhelming. DNA linked him to the Scarborough rapes. Forensic evidence tied him to Leslie and Kristen, and the videotapes, grotesque and undeniable, showed exactly what he had done. Karla testified against him. Calm, composed, rehearsed. She painted herself as a victim, manipulated, afraid, forced to comply. The jury didn't believe her, but it didn't matter. Her testimony, combined with the evidence, was enough. On September 1, 1995, Paul Bernardo was convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder, 2 counts of aggravated sexual assault, and multiple counts of rape. He was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole for 25 years. He would later be designated a dangerous offender, meaning he would likely never be released. Karla served her sentence quietly. She was housed in a psychiatric facility, not a maximum security prison. She took university courses. She painted. She wrote letters. And she gave interviews, cold, detached, devoid of remorse. When asked about her sister, she said, "It was an accident." When asked about Leslie and Kristen, she said, "I was terrified of Paul." On July 4, 2005, Karla Homolka walked out of prison. She had served her full 12 years. She was 35 years old. She changed her name. She moved to the Caribbean, then to Quebec. She married again, had children, and disappeared into suburban anonymity. Today, Karla Homolka lives under a different identity. She volunteers at her children's school. She attends parent-teacher meetings. She shops at grocery stores. She looks like any other mother. But the families of Leslie Mahaffy and Kristen know who she is, and they have spent decades fighting to keep her face in the public eye, to make sure no one forgets what she did. Because Karla Homolka isn't just a killer who walked free. She's a reminder of how the justice system can fail, how deals made in desperation can haunt a country for generations, how someone can smile in court, serve 12 years, and walk into freedom without ever saying, "I'm sorry." The videotapes, had they been discovered earlier, would have changed everything. But by the time they surfaced, Karla's deal was signed. Investigators who watched the footage described feeling sick. One officer said, "She wasn't forced. She was directing." Another said, "I've seen a lot in this job. But Karla smiling while holding down a teenage girl, that's something I'll never forget." The tapes were shown at Paul's trial, but only partially. The most graphic sections were never made public, and Karla's lawyers fought to keep her image out of the media. They argued that showing her face would violate her right to privacy, her right to rebuild her life. The courts agreed, and so, the woman who helped rape and murder 3 girls, including her own sister, was granted anonymity. But the internet doesn't forget. Photos of Karla circulate. Her new name has been leaked. People recognize her, and when they do, they post warnings. They share her photo with captions, "This woman is a killer," and Karla, unable to stop it, retreats further into the shadows. The families of Leslie Mahaffy, Kristen and Tammy Homolka don't get to leave it alone. They live with the permanent absence of their daughters and sister. They live with the knowledge that the woman who killed them walks free, and they live with the injustice of a system that valued a conviction over true justice. Paul Bernardo remains in prison. He has applied for parole multiple times. Each time, he is denied. Victims' families attend every hearing to ensure he stays locked away. They have said they will never stop fighting, because Paul, for all his cruelty, was convicted. He is paying, but Karla is not. What makes Karla Homolka so terrifying isn't just what she did. It's how she looked doing it. Blonde, pretty, polite. The kind of girl you'd trust to babysit your children. The kind of woman you'd sit next to on a bus and never think twice. Evil doesn't always look like a monster. Sometimes it looks like the girl next door. Karla Homolka is living proof that women can be just as cruel, just as calculating, just as monstrous as men. And the justice system, built on centuries of assumptions about female passivity, didn't know what to do with her, so they made a deal. And in making that deal, they let evil walk free. 12 years for 3 lives isn't justice. It's a mockery. It's a message that if you're smart enough, if you hire the right lawyer and play the victim well enough, you can walk away from almost anything. That's the legacy of Karla Homolka. Not just the crimes, but the escape. If you liked this story, check out the ones on your screen. The dark algorithm thinks you'll enjoy these too.